Hello, welcome again to WingChun Workout, bringing you content on exercises for WingChun. And today, again, we have Sifu Paul Wang. He's one of my instructors. And just a quick bio or background for Sifu Paul. He's a practitioner of the healing and martial arts and energy arts with over 20 years of teaching experience in these fields. In addition to his Sifu WingChun title, his academic and professional credentials are integrative biology with minor in Chinese philosophy from University of California at Berkeley, a master's in traditional Chinese medicine, and a doctorate in acupuncture and Chinese medicine from American College of Traditional Chinese Medicine. And also he's a professional accredited acupuncturist from the California Acupuncture Board as a licensed acupuncturist. All right, Sifu Paul, welcome again. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I'm glad to, this is kind of our second conversation with each other, so I look forward to seeing how this flows.
Yeah, so last time was a good session, and this time I have some more questions for you, or we can just have a discussion on a few topics that I have. And okay. Yeah, let's get started without further ado.
Let's do it.
So, yeah, so let me get into it here on my list. Oh, a good one. We're just going to go into more specific training questions because I know a lot of people, that's what they like as far as, well, that's what my channel is about, is how to become better in their Wing Chun training. The first topic is training different variations of techniques. So my training program is just a Wing Chun combinations and getting coordination, right? And so what I believe is my exercise routines have different variations of Bong Sao, Tan Sao, and things like that. So let's just talk about it as far as like how much you should vary your different, because a lot of people, they think that there's one way to do a technique, for example, Bong Sao, but according to, like, there might be a different angle or different situations where you would have to pull out a different variation. So do you think that's beneficial starting out, or at least just to have that in mind as far as the variations are concerned? Because I like to have like an open mindset as far as training, just at least keep that in the back of my mind, like, hey, there's not one way to do things, because I think a lot of people, they think there is. Do you just want to give your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say that a lot of times I give metaphors, so hopefully it's okay. And then it's not a digression, it's just metaphors are ways to understand a question or an unknown via something that's very familiar to most, if not all people. And one metaphor I like to use a lot is language. And so I think of technique, perhaps like you threw out some examples of technique. And this is true for any motion system. Of course, we're talking specifically about a particular dialect, if you will, called Wing Chun, which has these, Southern Chinese, Cantonese terminology like Bong and Tan. And so I respect, I want to say, first off, all the different variations, because we're all different and we have different backgrounds, lineages, interpretations. And I don't like to get into arguments about right or wrong. Of course, I do, these techniques, as you stated, and all techniques in a certain way that is very much informed. I think I mentioned it in our previous conversation about biomechanics. So, and human locomotion and biodynamics. That was my main study at UC Berkeley. And so I know some people, they prioritize the performance of techniques simply based on maybe received tradition, which I also respect, right? However, for me, that's not quite enough. this is how, the Sifu taught it to you. This is how the Qigong or the Xizhou, the teacher's teacher transmitted to you. For some people, that's enough. And I call those people, like high fidelity people who do a technique. I don't say it in a derogatory way, like obedient or like fundamentalist or traditionalist. I respect that, right? And I also have sort of another wing, so to speak. One wing is like tradition. I flap that wing. Thank you for all the work that you did in your lifetime to research and to teach these techniques. However, maybe it's my personality or maybe my cultural background. Right? I live both in the East and the West. I like to flap another wing. And you could say, stereotypically at least, the East is more tradition because maybe there's more kind of long-standing intergenerational transmission intact. Again, a generalization. Whereas the West, likes more independent innovation and kind of like, even in modern kind of decades in terms of technology, they like to even use this word disrupt, right? We disrupt the whatever cell phone industry. We disrupt, the taxi industry, right? With like these kind of, or even the hotel industry, right? With these kind of sort of the gig economy, they say. So that's kind of the overall. So I definitely have evolved also, let's say, my performance of these techniques over the years. So not just based on my own kind of teaching and research. So this kind of evolution, let's say the left wing of innovation, is not just based on my biomechanics and sort of non-traditional kind of research into the techniques, but also teaching. That's been a big also factor in how I do techniques. Maybe teaching people who have different body types, right? Different nervous systems. So for me, okay, maybe, the Tan or the Bong works a certain way, but I see, for the student, it doesn't quite work for people, maybe if they're smaller or whatever, bigger or thinner. And so I may adapt my performance of technique based on how I see the student actually struggling with it, right? And so back to the language analogy is that, even like the letter, even not in terms of words, but just letter, alphabet, English alphabet, A, the first letter, right? It's pronounced in different ways in different contexts, right? You have the short A, like cat, and then, sometimes you pronounce it with the long A, like Kate, eight, right? So it's the same letter, same bone, same time. But
some people even have accents too, right?
Right, a little or something like that. And to me, is that right or wrong? So again, not that I'm a universalist and everything is okay. Ultimately for martial context, like rubber has to meet the road, and ideally we perform the technique in a way that's not just functional for me in this narrow context, right? But if you have a school, if you have a lineage, ideally the technique and its variations, and maybe that's why we need variations, right? The first way of doing Tan, Bong, whatever, is relevant for like 60% of situations. And, majority of people, 80-90% of students can perform it successfully in this way, in this context, maybe for straight strike, yeah? And let's say Tan, right? In the frontal way. But if the strike is coming from the side, lateral, right, more circular attacks, does this frontal performance of Tan suffice? I would say no, regardless of your size, unless you're huge, right? You have to modify it, right? You have to change the accent. And the analogy then, is like maybe instead of like a short frontal, maybe you have to continue that trajectory to go a little bit more out. So I often talk about spirals. To me, spirals and its variables actually allow a universal underlying unity among a diversity of techniques, right? So let's say, Tan is this way or Tan is this way. Well, they're both named Tan, Tan, right? Different pronunciations, but it's like, this is different, right? I would say no. Actually, they're actually both. They look like different, but they're actually the different subsets, different arcs segments of one spiral, right? So if I kind of do it more of the top-down view, right? You see, to me, this is all tan, right? In Chinese, tan means spreading. So it's kind of spreading the energy like this. You see that? If I stop really short in front of me, right, maybe it looks just like that. But if I continue it, you see? And so you can say frontal tan or side tan, which is right or wrong. Oh, tan shouldn't go out. Tan, or tan should go out, right? So you may have an argument. One school is like tan is this. No, tan is this, right? And to me, like, well, depend on the context. They're both tan, and it's not even either or. I would say they're actually one thing, depending on your ability. You mentioned integrative biology, so this term, this adjective, can you integrate actually these differences with underlying principles? And to me, I use the geometric principle of spiraling a lot, because spirals underlie so much of nature. And I use nature again as another rubric besides geometry, the geometry of nature. For instance, spirals are in your DNA, right? And also at a small scale, as well as in the galaxies. A lot of phenomena also spirals in that context too. So from small to large scale, and us in between. So just to kind of be concise, technical performance varies depending on context, and that context could be context of interaction of attack, or the context could be the person's body type, or the context could be time. Like I did tan this way for 5 years, but then 5 years later I actually varied it. So it could also be due to your own kind of expansion of awareness and application.
Yeah, where do you think this idea comes from? Do you think it's like I guess a major Wing Chun concept of like simplicity? We just want to like narrow something down to like one tan sao, or do you think it's like from experience, where like most people they may only learn up to a certain point. They may only learn up to Sitem Tao, right? And they learn like, I don't know, 1 or 2 versions of tan sao, and it's like, oh, this is it, and they haven't learned the other forms. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that?
This is really deep and actually very, very important conversation. So again, metaphor, right? So imagine a mountain with a round base and then moving up towards a peak. So someone starts at the north side, right? Someone starts at the south side, right? Someone starts at the east side. There's 4 trailheads, right? Let's say 4 directions. Mm-hmm. And of course, if you have fellow hikers that start at the same trailhead, you have similar experience, right? We go from the south to the top, right, or north to the top. Now, then you get to a point where maybe you go higher up, right? And so notice when you go higher up, this journey of training, journey of cultivation, at some point, right, there's a maximum peak, right? Let's say we all meet there. So at the bottom, we start completely opposite, 180 degrees. You go from the north and you're hiking in a way southwards, right? Someone starts at the south and in a way they're hiking up northwards. And so if you just stay at the base of the mountain, right? Imagine someone at the north, they hike up a little bit, and then someone at the south, they hike up a little bit. Maybe they go around, right? And they meet at the east side and say, oh, what is the mountain? What is your experience? What is the trail up this mountain? Some might say very rocky. Others say, no, it's not rocky and dry. It's very wet and, forested, right? And so they might argue, this is kind of a very basic example. And you see this in a lot of situations, it could be, like religion, it could be politics, right? You talk about the left and the right. You talk about the, maybe the Christian and the Buddhist and the Muslim, whatever, and so when you're at the base, it's fine. You're at the outer, right? Does that make sense? Outer circle. So, you may focus on those outer shapes like Tan or Bo. But and let's say martial arts, right? One guy is a Wing Chun person, and the other guy is a karate person, right? And so, one is internal martial art, one is external martial art, whatever, right? All these distinctions. But when you get to the top, right? Especially when that top view, you don't just have like a 90-degree or 180-degree view, you have a 360-degree view. Now, of course, you had your own experience, your training experience, so that's unique. But when you get to the top, right, you have a more common sort of view. Even though one started in the karate school, one started in the Wing Chun school, but in my experience, once you go more to the inner, from the exo to the so, esoteric, there's much more commonality. This is my personal experience. I'm using this mountain model, but I would say maybe the way I do Wing Chun, not to say I'm at the peak or something like that. Well, it's just a metaphor. And I've gone to this point. I may have more in common with a karate person who's gone this long journey, and we're pretty close to each other, right? Compared to another Wing Chun person who's just starting off, right? Who's just read a book or something like that. And same thing, this karate person may be closer to me than another karate person at the trailhead. So that's kind of the way I see it. So it's kind of experience, but it's not just experience. It's also like in terms of time. It's also the breadth of experience, right? So if you had really tunnel vision, this is the Wing Chun way. I'm not going to look at anything else, right? And you may get to the top, but maybe it's very narrow, right? And you might be surprised that there's a karate person that could get to the top too. But so my experience is that yes, you should sort of commit to a school, a path, a lineage, at least for the first years. Let's say 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. It's very hard nowadays, right? Because so much information out there, right? You get distracted. But this is kind of ideal. Root yourself, find a good teacher, good community, find a movement system that you enjoy, right? That fits your purposes. Commit to it, stabilize, set a foundation. And then at some point, maybe 5 years in or so, and this is my experience studying different things, not just martial arts, then maybe start to have communication. Otherwise, it's hard to communicate when you don't know who you are, right? And you're easily confused and influenced. Know who you are first, let's say about 3, 4, 5 years, and then you can start to compare maybe, right? So develop your breadth, right? And I would say it's hard. I don't think any one person has completely stepped on every square foot of the mountain. So there's a humility there, right? Like I may have stepped on, 80% of this mountain, but there's that 20% I just didn't get to, and so that's why it's useful. I would say you talked about simplicity. It's useful to have these principles like everything has its opposite, or if there's an internal, there's an external. If there's hard, if there's soft. That's one that I go by, right? So if someone tells me one thing, it should be this way. Well, I listen, I try to understand, but I automatically think, can it work the opposite of what they're saying too, right? And then maybe you find somewhere in between, right? So I think that's a very useful, it's more relaxed too, maybe it's better nowadays. I don't know if it's better or worse, these arguments of right and wrong. But I think a lot of these variations just come from someone's subset of experience, along that height and breadth. If someone is just, gone up, 20 feet and left and right just 2 feet, they have this 20 foot by 2 foot kind of segment. They only explore that part. That's great. Maybe they master that part, but there's so much more. And so my experience, yes, I started maybe very narrow, like Wing Chun. Now, like I say Wing Chun maybe is my foundation, but oftentimes I don't even really, necessarily not identify with Wing Chun. We talked about maybe the philosophy of it. I definitely do, but to me, I also see a lot in common with other styles too. And ultimately, I think to master, let's say, to use, that's the loaded term, one must make one's experience one's own, right? And so it's not like you're just collecting techniques again, talk about techniques, but outside in, right? To me, techniques are good in that they're like spokes of a wheel to try to get you to the core where those principles are. Once you touch that core, then principles become secondary, right? I don't necessarily need exactly the tan in a certain way. I can do a movement that maybe doesn't look like a tan or sound like a tan, walk like a duck, talk like a duck, but it's effective in the context, right? So, and also you don't get so much lost in all the techniques. The techniques can arise from the inside out based on your own creativity in the movement, right? And of course, a lot of people know Bruce Lee. I think that's what he was kind of pointing to, But as a beginner, yes, you need more rigidity, you need more formality, you need more technique per se. But once you get to intermediate advanced, I think we need to let some of that go. And automatically also you let some of that kind of either or, arguments with people who are stuck on just the external form and technique. This is time, no, that is time. But if you zoom up and you say, okay, I can see why you see things that way, but I can also see why that other person sees things that way, and you have a more global view. And this is then where this kind of cultivation process we're talking about the martial makes maybe you heard the archetype like a peaceful warrior, where at some point you're like you can see the integrated view, so you don't feel like and you prioritize your energy. So a lot of these arguments to me aren't worth our energy and time. I much like to see what's in common.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I like the way you touched on like maybe it's a person's experience. Like just from my experience in martial arts for a while, and even teaching people, like you see a lot of guys, they get confident once they find something that works, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they might just bash everything, but they don't have like the higher level experience as far as like the style or martial arts in general, to be more mature and to like say, okay, well, I could see like what you were saying, I could see this other person, and instead of just criticizing, just say, hey, why is this person doing this, right? Is there a specific context or reason why, instead of just saying, hey, that's wrong, or or a lot of times I get that on the internet, right? Oh, you're not doing this right, the technique's not right. I'm like, okay, whatever.
Yeah,
But
I've had a lot of that too.
oh yeah, well, I think everybody, especially on the internet, you can't
Yeah.
I guess avoid it, right?
Yeah.
But I also like what you said as far as identifying with other martial arts, because I've had that experience as well. Like I've taken other martial arts, and like for example, I took like Muay Thai for a few years, and I think I caught on pretty quickly. And basically what I did was like I identified things that were like really similar to what I do in Wing Chun. I know some people's Wing Chun's background is a little bit different, but I thought like the squared stance, that was the same, or the same idea, the same concepts. And yeah, some of the stances were the same. Also leg attacks, leg kicks and blocks, similar idea. And even comparing Chi Sao with their kind of like clinching, right? I think part of that, I was like, I wonder if the Chi Sao came from grappling or some sort, and added punches and stuff like that. So I thought that was pretty, and you can compare that with, I guess, not even Muay Thai, other Chinese martial arts, or any martial art. I think they have like similar aspects, instead of like pointing out the differences and pointing out the similarities, right? Especially if you cross train. I think it's for me, it was beneficial in doing that. Say, okay, this is similar to what I already know, and I can apply it instead of trying to reinvent the wheel. So I thought that was I like what you said about that. So
yeah, it's ultimately it's even cultivate. Maybe when we're younger, let's say, like you have the kind of playground rules, like maybe even bullying or something. This could be literal too, by the way. But I'm just saying more like, oh, my dad can beat up your dad, and these kind of more argumentative to me. I mean, okay, maybe if you're a kid or teenager, but at some point, I think the maturation, and if we're talking about mastery, it's just the advancement and actualization of our potential. I think it must include also the evolution of the way that we approach an art, and one way is just, again, everyone has their background or chip on their shoulder or something that happens. So, some maybe just get stuck and they, maybe that's their habit, that they approach life like that, like against, more antagonistic, and I think I'm perhaps being biased here. I think another way to live, and kind of approach the arts and your life, right? This is where martial art principles that you learn via the training can be applied to the way you approach other people and other relationships. One is like, it's about assumptions, right? Like, I'm right, you're wrong, right? Or whatever. That's a very, limited. I would say immature. And more mature is that I have my assumptions, you have your assumptions, right? And and that's just the reality of it. The third level is that can we find overlap, of those assumptions? Can I learn from you? Can you learn from me? Instead of just straw manning each other. That's like saying that this person making up a certain a caricature of Wing Chun, right, or karate, or MMA or Tai Chi Chuan, right? Those kind of things, and then attacking that. Oh, they're just like that. That's that kind of straw man argument is, I think, lazy logic and lazy thinking, and immature actually. Do you want to? And this kind of gets into martial arts. Is it for fighting, right, or is it for empowering, right? And yes, fighting is one context, one slice of the pie. I think a capable martial arts should be able to defend themselves, but is that everything about the why and what and how of our training? Or is it also kind of overcoming some of those kind of programming that we have in a way that fighting ourselves, right? That actually prevent us from having good relationships, good culture. And so I like, I can't help but kind of zoom in and out. So I really appreciate this discussion, and for us to be able to talk about how can we pave a path of training that is beneficial at all levels, and to even your so-called opponent from a different school or style. Like back in the day, like in the movies, I challenge you, and that's cool, maybe, okay, and then what, we beat each other up, and then what, but can we learn something? Do we have the humility to say, like, can we get a coffee or drink some tea? Like, I like what you did there. What was that? So I don't know, maybe I'm idealistic. Maybe it's hard with all the egos and the kind of inflamed sort of platforms and positions nowadays. But as a healer, I think maybe that's a healer part coming out. Heal and whole and well are kind of similar in etymology, and so you see a lot of conflict going on in the world, and I think it comes from lack of cultivation, whether it's martial cultivation or meditation or whatever. And there's so much there's kind of assumptions, and either or the other person is, I don't know, just too much division. So for myself, it's healing for myself. Like, if that's all I see and I internalize that, I feel bad. I feel anxious. I feel, like imbalanced. But if I can cultivate another way of being, right, then it kind of immunizes me against all the craziness out there. And maybe if that becomes strong enough, then I can vibe out to other people this kind of more integrative way of being.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, because especially during the past few years, a lot of martial arts schools or martial arts in general, people weren't able to practice, right? And so yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting. Like, some people I would meet who are I would consider fellow martial artists in the community. They had the same mindset, hey, I'm gonna it's like me versus you, and I'm like, hey, we're almost we're all struggling here. We're almost about to die. It's like, why are you trying to fight me? Or have this ego thing. It was pretty weird. But I guess that's people, I guess.
Yeah, and the context. I mean, talk about context a lot. Yeah, if that's the culture, if that's what's going on now, right? And if we kind of go into maybe the tradition, like I know, like for instance, the Japanese martial arts, at least traditionally, they talked about Bushido, right? 武士道 in Mandarin. So it's a way. It's not just about technique. That's how we started off the conversation. It's not just about fighting. Yes, right? Absolutely. Like, if someone really is going to threaten you or that which you love, then yeah, you should be capable. But if you want to make it a do or a dao or a way, I think we need to have these kind of conversations. So you can say physical training, but also meta physical. That doesn't mean something up there in the clouds, but meaning, how do you transfer these principles that are functional, that are tested, that are efficacious through a lot of training over and over. Check Tan, how does Tan work, how does bone work, and then you get that somatic confidence. It's like somatopsychic. Everyone's heard of psychosomatic, right? You think a certain way and it affects the body, psyche, mind, soma, body. But I think martial arts is actually almost irreplaceable as a form of somatopsychic training. I mean, you have dance, which is interactive, it's embodied, but you don't simulate, maybe certain kinds of dance, like battle, okay? How to in a simulated, right? It's safe, right? Situation, violence, and be able to test out certain principles as expressed via certain techniques, like Tan. Can we spread out the attack, right? Can we wing it out, right? Talk about the two wings, the bong. Bong means to wing out. Can we use this principle of dissolution or whatever you want to say, and check it out? Okay, my Sifu says, try this, and don't believe it per se. I mean, enough trust to test it, but you have to make it your own. And the only way, and that's hard, right? Like you said, when we couldn't meet in person, test over, and that's probably why a lot of people just get ideas, and it's theoretical debates, and they actually haven't tested out in empirical, embodied experience what works and doesn't work. So they're just arguing like hypotheses, right? So in a very scientific way, the observation, let me see what's going on. And then hypothesis, how can I solve the situation or what is going on? And then test it over and over and over again. And when that internalizes, like, dang, right? If I this kind of spiraling principle or whatever, I would say it cannot help if you do something so many times that it moves from the conscious to the subconscious, that it doesn't transfer outside of the dojo or the training space. I think, and I've seen it again, this is not just theory, I've seen it with students who, through the training, somatopsychically transform almost their personality. And people advertise it, right, like that in martial arts school, confidence, right? But where does that confidence come from? It's not the technique per se, right? It's with this collegial atmosphere where they're actually trying to help each other, right, and learn from each other, test out in a way that's cooperative, right? At least enough to gain confidence at a basic level, and then you can test each other, and kind of use some non-compliance and see, oh wow, it still works. So one of the kind of principles that I'm coming to mind now is I call it everything is everything. Every individual thing that is a technique like Counterbone should include everything. That is your whole mind, your whole experience, your whole body, right? If you just do Tan with your wrist or your elbow, I mean, it's not that effective, right? It can stop or spread, dissolve a simple, slow, weak punch. But if you do every movement, with your whole body and your whole mind behind it, much more effective, right? So let's just call that integration, like integral approach to every part expresses the whole, right? Kind of almost like a fractal or holistic. Now, I believe that is also important when we are, having conversations with people outside of a martial context too, right? Or even life. Can you see life in a connected way, or is it just pieces and parts? So technique important, right? Technique is like alphabet, A, B, C, D. Now, do you want to? It's not enough, right? To be on the other end is poetry, right? You start with alphabet technique, but can you get to poetry, right? You start with individual technique like Tan or Bong, right? But can you piece them together into words, phrases like maybe Bong Tan, right? As a combination, or Tan Bong. Oh, wow, that's a short word, A, B, B, A, you can put together. And then the next stage is like scripted phrases, like when you're learning a language. I am Paul. Okay, what is your name, right? Scripted. And then later on, it becomes more free, fluent, right? And later on, some years, when you make it your own expression, it becomes poetry. But I think a lot of people are stuck in martial alphabet, and they argue about the alphabet, or they're arguing about these kind of just phrases. Very few people are able to master that at that scale, but also like nested holes, right? Like those Russian dolls. Be really eloquent, know your ABCs, have a very good vocabulary, right? And also be able to string together beautiful sentences, meaningful paragraphs, and also make it your own. And that's the poetry or mastery, let's say, in that kind of level of expression.
Cool, got it. Yeah,
yeah.
and yeah. So just to summarize, because I think there was a lot there. So in the context of solo training, and training variations in particular, we want to kind of like limit our variations to where we can, I guess, train them effectively. Like just too much will just get us too distracted in our training. So if we want to hone our skill, I would think we have a few variations to train, right? So instead of just straight, maybe a side angles, a few different angles, train those, especially for coordination purposes. I think that's good, but not too much, right? Because then it will be hard to master that particular technique.
What do you mean too much? Too much variation, you mean?
Yeah, too much variation.
Yeah. It's a balance between, kind of, strict repetition,
Right.
to really build up that kind of familiarity, right? And then we got to invest even more, right? You're starting to get bored even. Like I've done this already, like 5,000 times, but it's still at the conscious level, right? Now then, if you want to get to the second stage, which is proficiency, you got to go beyond that boredom. And boredom, I would say, when you say, you see students are like, even yourself, like, I already did this, that is a really crucial point in the training, in this kind of conscious repetition, is that's the threshold where you move from conscious to subconscious, right? Boredom is kind of the barrier between where it's just in your head. Yeah, I know, right? You think my friend or grasshopper, but it hasn't burned deep enough into the subconscious, right? So where you can do it without that kind of deliberate focus, right? But without that deliberate focus, you'll never be able to drive it down, right? If you just did like 5,000 reps like this, like watching TV, right? Versus someone else who's really embodied and really focusing on, the latter, you're going to earn it, right? You're going to earn it. So it's not enough just to learn. You got to earn, right? Which means learn is like, receive, collect the knowledge. Oh, okay, I learned this technique. The earn part, that's the hardest part. That's the cooking part. That's the repetition. That's like where you got to overcome your impatience, your boredom, all the distractions, right? And let's say it takes 10,000 repetitions or 100, depends on the person, right? And what quality of repetition is it, right? If you're just kind of like, right? So in order to what, right? In order to go to the second level from familiarity to proficiency, which you can say is from the conscious. And one thing is actually conscious means you have to understand it, right? The name, the angle, that's already hard enough, right? But then to drive it to the subconscious, it requires really like integrating that focus, that intention, and nothing can replace, repetition. So this is what I like to say, not just high quantity and not just high quality, like the perfect time, and you only did it once. So the name of the game is not low quantity of low quality. That's going to get you nowhere, right? Low quality and low quantity, like you just do something like, three times, very low level. Okay, what about, low quality, low quantity of high quality, right? You do it perfectly, but only 5 times. That's also not enough, right? So what about high quantity of low quality? Right? That's okay. At least you're training. You may be training wrong. So I would say that's okay. That's second best. Low quality is not perfect, but you did a lot of it. Okay. Because at least you have experience. And then at least we can make some tweaks. Does that make sense? Because some people say, I didn't want to train it wrong. So, right. I would say no one is training it perfectly, especially in the beginning. Just do it at your level. Do it wrong, train it wrong, make the mistakes. At least you're training, right? High quantity of so-so quality. That's okay, right? But of course, the best is when you get to a certain level is high quantity of high quality. Wow. Okay. And now you're moving into like the stage of mastery, where you can self-correct, right? Where it's, like I said, it's coming from the inside out, right? And so both at the very technical level, or you're feeling as you're doing this tan, is it coming from your whole body? Are you grounded to the earth? Do you feel the ground, right? And if you're doing it as an application, can you also sense the timing and the position and the arms, right? The variables of the partner or the opponent, not just your own self, right? So in other words, you kind of have to develop this martial empathy, right? Like where you have to actually feel and be so sensitive, right? to not just your own interoception, your own inner state, right? Technical to, even musculoskeletal, right? Neurological, even your breath, right? But be able to project that onto and into another person. So, I mean, if you see two good dancers, partner dancing, like ballroom dancing, it's amazing, right? What they can do. But in the case of the martial, it's like, you don't want to dance with them for, 10 minutes, right? You want to be able to hone and train yourself, like really in a situation of true violent asocial self-defense, like where you use all of your sensitivity, all of your focus, all of your training to hopefully, within milliseconds, be able to end the situation in your favor, of course, right?
Cool. All right. So that was question number one, or topic number one.
Yeah. But we can also, we can edit out and do part one, part two. But but since we have the time, we can continue, some discussion. I think it's good flow so far. We can go deeper or change gears as you like.
Yeah. Let me just look through quite our topics here. Of course, we can't cover all of them. Okay. So this is a good one. Footwork. Mm-hmm. So how do you become mobile in your footwork, and actually what's a good, balance of mobility and stability? So let me just tell you where I'm coming from. So a lot of, conventional WingChun people, they think about, excuse me, the concept of efficiency. Mm-hmm. And you shouldn't move at all. Mm-hmm. So that's one extreme. And then you have other people like, I don't know, they think that you need to jump around and move a lot, like Bruce Lee or somebody, right? Yeah. So, what's your, opinion on this? Because, you have those two extremes, and what is the right, like I said, balance of footwork? Because I don't believe that you don't need to move at all, but I also believe that you don't want to waste your energy too. So, yeah.
Oh, wow, this is really good too. So to make it simple, you brought up that principle earlier. I believe in the principle of simplicity, but not being simplistic. Simplicity as a way to understand and explain things that's sufficient, that's adequate, that's complete, and maybe no more. But maybe more examples sometimes come into play. But so in terms of simplicity, in this case, footwork, I would say, has two. And I'll use, again, this philosophical dialectic. It's not just Chinese, but this or that yin and yang, a duality, right? And so in this context, because you mentioned stability and mobility, so that's already a dialectic, a yin and a yang, right? So yin, we say, is more stillness, so that would be more stability, right? And then yang is more active movement, so I would say mobility, okay? So we have yin, we have yang, we have stillness, we have motion. Stability and mobility. And to make it more technical, I can throw into these two columns. In the yin column, static, stillness, stationary, stability, stance. Okay, your stances. In Chinese martial arts, we say ma, or ma, horse, right? And then in the yang category of mobility, right, motion, flexibility, adaptability, right? We can say step, so which is bu or bo, right, in Cantonese or Mandarin. So actually in Chinese, we say ma bu, ha bu, right? You'll see that in whatever, Kung Fu glossary, Kung Fu books, ma bo, right, in Cantonese. So I think to the layman, right, or to a beginner, they might think that that's one term, ma bu. Okay, do your ma bu. However, I want to make a distinction that they're exactly how you kind of ask the question, and I'm kind of putting into this container of terminology, right, and technique. Stance should be maximally stable, and step should be optimizing movement, right? So I would say stance as long as you can, as long as it's relevant, as long as you're in advantageous position, right? And when you must, due to some reason, right, internal or external, move, then you want to optimize your transition, right, to another strong position, right? So it's like ma, bu, ma, bu, ma, bu, stand, step, stand, step, stand, steps. Or if I kind of make a rhythm, it's not so equal, right? Sometimes stands, step, step, stand, step, 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 stands, right? So sometimes you're in the stance for a couple seconds and then a quick step or two, and then maybe a quick stance that has to change again, right? So it becomes almost, I use another metaphor we talked about. I mean, it's like language too. It would be very boring and ineffective if my communication was like the same tone and same speed. As you can tell, when I get excited, it's high and low, loud and quiet. And so I think in a other kind of dynamic situation, not verbal communication, but in a way martial communication, maybe it's an argument, that because of the variability of the other person coming at you, right? That sometimes you're in a stance more, but sometimes you're in stepping mode more, right? And I would say yes. Overstancing, right? We usually say overstep. Don't overstep, right? About overstancing is not relevant because, or is bad, or is dangerous because when you should move and you don't move, right? Then it could be problematic, right? Let's say someone is coming at you, like trying to tackle you, right? And you're like, oh, my stance, is so strong, right? Yes, maybe compared to an untrained person, like they would just get knocked over within, a second. And if you're trained, right, maybe you can hold it, right, for 2 seconds or 3 seconds because of more groundedness. But it's still a lot of momentum. But you're like, no, I'm a stancer, right? And you get knocked over, right? Versus if you would have changed your stance, right, like at 2.5 seconds rather than overstancing, then you would have been able to preserve your structure and not get knocked over, right? I mean, you think of like a bull, right? Like the bull shouldn't just be, the matador. I mean, this is not the most savory example. Shouldn't just be running around the arena, right? This matador is standing there, right? But when the bull is coming at them, at some point, it's kind of like they say, right? Wait for it, still stance, keep your stance, and then now, maybe you move, right? Or you step, change your stance. I mean, change of stance in a way is what I'm calling step, right? It doesn't always require moving your feet, but you can sometimes turn, right? But that's a stance change, right? Now, so that's called overstancing, right? Standing too long, stationary, position too long. You move your car, move your position. You're gonna get bombed on, right? So the other is you can say overstepping, right? It's kind of like you said about you mentioned Bruce Lee, but for the movies. It would be boring, right?
Yeah.
It'd be boring if like just standing there, like the guy's not moving for even 30 seconds, right? It's like, right? So in the movie, of course, or in entertainment, right? And like competition, right? Or if there's aesthetics, you need to maybe do more stepping, right? But there's such thing as unnecessary stepping. And I know some people, when they're jumping around, they see that as necessary because it's kind of tricky, you're kind of keeping in your flow, right? And you're kind of throwing off the opponent. It's like, hey, look over there, and then you go that way. kind of tricky, like or maybe you just like to dance. I don't know. But in terms of energy, right? Talking about efficiency, economy of movement or energy. Yeah, there's such thing as too much, right? Too much yang, right? As well as too much yin on both sides. Right? So I think a good martial artist is being able to balance, like when standing is relevant and effective, don't need to move, right? You can strike from that position or defend from that position. Right? When stepping becomes advantageous, right? And it could be like half a second later, right? Then you turn your body or step to another direction. So I would say that efficiency, okay, is good, but not efficiency meaning prioritizing stances, prioritizing not moving. To me, that's not efficiency. Maybe I'm talking about efficacy, which is like stance is great, but to have a bias, I think is a bit dangerous in this context, right? Because it depends on, again, the context of the opponent. If the opponent is bigger, is more momentum or faster, then you may step more, right? But if the opponent is slower or it's not so dynamic, is not changing directions, so you don't have to step or change your stance to face them, then you may be more in stance. Yeah. So again, it's contextual. And I think therefore, 50-50, like train your stances. And there are ways to train it, right? Like, in a non kind of self-defense context, like train your stance. In Wing Chun, we have these basic stances, but all martial arts do. I think you should be able to stand statically with pressure. If someone is pushing on your stance, right, whether your arm or your hips or your shoulder, that's good stance training, to be able to withstand pressure, right? Because stances are for that. And whereas steps, you can do more dynamic training, like the opponent is feeding you from the left side or the right side, or coming towards you or backing away. That's stance training. But both are very important, equally important. In a way, steps begin and end in a stance. So how can you say, like stepping is more important, right, than stances? They depend on each other, right? And steps allow you to move from one stance to another, right? So
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one of my biggest pet peeves, because I guess I've just seen a lot of people who's, to use what your terms, like have an overemphasis of stance, and yeah, they get into trouble really quick. So yeah, and I think what I tell people is like, basketball, where they have this 3-second rule. I tell people to have kind of like an internal timer. Of course, 3 seconds is probably too long in martial arts, but have like some type of internal timer to where, okay, so your opponent, he's looking at you, right? And if you just stand there, he's going to analyze you. And even though if you have the most perfect stance or position, he's going to look at your weaknesses and he's going to change and he's going to attack that. So I would say, if you have this internal timer, even though that you're not even and I know that distance and timing has a lot to do with it as well, right? So if you're in the incorrect distance, that's not good. Right. If you're in the opponent's punching distance, then
right. maybe step.
Yeah, maybe move out of the way.
Yeah.
But yeah. I just think it, like, in terms of strategy, it's good to at least like to move at some point, right? Or even if you have like good stance per se, right, or in good timing, and you should still train your footwork, have good footwork, because that's my pet peeve is people, they don't know how to move. And I myself personally, I train that a lot because I find a lot of value in being able to be mobile and to change. Not saying that you need it all the time, but it's good, especially like if you're dealing with a person that's not your average street thug, right? They might be trained, right? They might know how to throw a kick at your leg, and if you're in the wrong distance, or if you just stand there and they move quicker than what you're accustomed to, right, then you're going to be in trouble. So but yeah, I think that's all good wisdom that you've said there. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
So another question, and I was just thinking about this. This is on my list. I don't have to read off right now. As far as strength and conditioning training, like how would you go about that in the context of Wing Chun? Because like over the last 2 years, we've had, we couldn't go to places for a while. So I did a lot of outside training, and I got into, martial arts, it's calisthenics is like a staple of the training anyways, right? But I've gotten like to like muscle ups and all that type stuff. But I think people, they might be confused. So like, okay, how much of this is actually beneficial to your Wing Chun or martial arts in general? Like, does doing a muscle up or doing a front lever or that type of stuff, will that help you in a fight?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I remember the last conversation I talked about. I think I used the five A's, like the different kind of martial activities or objectives, right? If you're doing more for athletics, right, martial athletics, like combat sport is another term. Yeah, I mean, conditioning should be, tip top as high as you can, because you're going to be in there potentially, right, for many rounds, right, and you might be gassed out if you are not in shape, right? Now, also, maybe if you're doing martial aesthetics, that's like stunts, or acrobatics. Yeah, I mean, conditioning is important both cardiovascularly, because sometimes those routines are like, 2, 4, 5 minutes long, all out, right? Or you want to be in the movies, right? Like some of those, you got to repeat the scenes, right, for hours. So if you're out of shape, then it's also not going to be optimal, right? And also in terms of the acrobatic aesthetic aspect of it, you need more range of movement, right? Like you have to be able to do fancy and high kicks and spinning things. So now if you're doing it for like fitness, for kind of more meditation or spirituality, or even for self-defense, those kind of categories, I would say conditioning is not as important. Why? Because if you are doing it the fitness part, yeah, okay, that's the point, right? To do martial fitness is for the conditioning. Okay, so now if you want to do it more for psychology, philosophy, spirituality, then it's not so important. Maybe just doing the regular forms and training are sufficient. You don't have to do conditioning outside of the martial movements, right? So I think that may be what you're talking about. So for the others, yeah, I mean, lifting weights and doing extra stretches, beyond the range of movement that you would actually use in your context is relevant, right? So what about for the self-defense part? That's a good question. Maybe in between, because if you're training for self-defense, do you need to have, let's say, six-pack? Do you need to be able to do a pull-up? Do you need to be able to do, 100 sit-ups? Do you need to be able to run, a distance under a certain amount of time, certain speed, or a marathon? I would say no. And I would say it's not wrong or bad or unnecessary. I mean, unhelpful, but it's not absolutely necessary. I would say, yes, you should be in good average shape, but you don't need to be in a super condition to be able to do self-defense well. And the reason is because you're not going to be fighting in the ring. You're not going to be doing these crazy, not crazy, but these very strenuous movements. I would say for self-defense, it's a bit more about strategy. And again, integration is that you should be able to throw your whole body mass and even accelerate it to the tip of your weapon, whether it's a fist or arm or elbow, and coordinate that to a certain point in time. So maybe put your whole body weight, right? You can't just kind of wiggle into it. Put your whole body weight, into your knuckles, right? That's coordination, I would say, is more important than conditioning, to the opponent's face or throat or chest, right? At a certain distance. And of course, when you train, right, then you have to do that, a number of times, dozens, hundreds of times. So, so in a way, this is kind of idealization. It's a bit hypothetical, but in a self-defense situation, right, someone surprises you, or you find yourself suddenly attacked, right? Then it's more strategic. You don't want to wrestle with them. You don't want to dance with them. And you don't care to look good. As soon as possible, attack one of their vulnerable targets, right? Or any target ultimately, because the nervous system is the whole body. You don't have to use like these lethal points, like, here on the lips or the throat, or, I mean, even if you punch them hard on their shoulder, right, unexpectedly, or elbow them in the back or whatever, I mean, it will cause a reaction. But if you can, of course, more focal, like throat is great, solar plexus, ribs, nose, right, ears. But in the heat of a self-defense situation, maybe you can't be so precise. But if you just do like a whole body like movement to whatever, your shoulder to your elbow, whatever you can get on them, right? Boom, right? That's good. You need to be able to do that. And yes, maybe you need to do that multiple times, enough, I would say, to escape. So maybe that part of self-defense conditioning is good. Like you have to be able to at least run down the stairs or run around the block or run to the people who can help you, so definitely, let's say, in terms of, like more philosophy for the more spiritual, you don't have to be in good condition. Not that you should be unhealthy, but, and then for self-defense, maybe in a better shape than someone just training it for the internal and for the philosophy. And then if you're going to go into like, combat sport, well, obviously the fitness part of martial art, yeah, okay, that's why you're doing it. So it makes sense, right? Do your exercises, get a good workout. Now, if you're going to go into like competition and then like say stunts, yeah, I would say then conditioning is much more important. And when I say conditioning, I'm defining it as like push-ups, pull-ups, like lifting weights, stretching outside of the conditioning within the martial movement itself, right? Because that already is a kind of conditioning. Like we talk about tan, right? It's a bone conditioning, it's a muscle conditioning, it's a nervous system conditioning, right? But do you need to do movements outside of the technical parameters for self-defense? I would say not really necessary, not absolutely necessary for sure. Relatively, yes, but not absolutely. But if you're going to do combat sports, or if you're going to do like, performance, yeah, better be in good shape.
Are there any supplemental exercises that you would recommend, like for, I guess, to increase your power or just to get the extra edge per se?
Yeah.
Or because I know you say you focus mainly on the martial aspect or the martial training, get good at that, right? But if you want to take it a little bit further, like I don't know, if you want to punch someone and knock them out, first punch.
Yeah. Yeah. So what that has to do with as much as individual muscle groups, like, so you analyze a punch is primarily anterior deltoid, triceps, right? A little bit of pectoralis, abdominals and quadriceps and your butt, right? And your calf, like the muscles that we use for sprinting, right? Pushing, extension. Yeah, so then you have to analyze that. Okay, so if that's the case, then I want to increase the muscular force, right? And so, of course, you can just do individual, like, okay, shoulder presses to get the anterior deltoid, tricep press downs to get the tricep, maybe push-ups or bench press to get the pecs, sit-ups to get the core, right? Quadricep, leg extensions, or squats are good. And actually, squats is a good segue because I think the best movements that are more applicable to martial context are compound movements like squats. So if you just, do like bicep, or tricep, that's okay. Maybe that muscle gets stronger, but are you able to integrate it into a kinetic chain, right? That, like I said, can incorporate your whole body into a strike. Yeah. So to me, conditioning is not just muscular hypertrophy, is as much important neuromuscular coordination, right? So I can do, say you have a device to measure, pounds per square inch for a strike. Like I can, without much training, maybe hit it, whatever, like 200 pounds of force. Now with maybe some instruction, like, okay, make sure you're not just hitting it with the arm. I did this actually. I was working with some kids in a class this morning, and they're like whatever 50 pounds, 80 pounds, right? And so without any muscular hypertrophy, right? They didn't suddenly gain weight, right? But when I showed them how to again connect psychosomatically, right? Neural musculo-skeletally, right? Then wow, like the punch maybe like doubled in terms of output, right? One is because they're able to throw their whole body mass at me, all 60 pounds. And when they're hitting my solar plexus or the pad, I mean that's considerable force, right? And the other thing is to be able to do it faster, like accelerate from zero, within a short distance. The more you can accelerate from zero to, let's say, whatever, 10 meters per second in a short distance, that's much more momentum, much more damage. So to me, those are psychoneural aspect, not so much musculoskeletal, right? So of course, if I had a whole, 4-year course in, undergraduate studies in martial arts, I mean, I would do everything. I would teach them about, neurophysiology. I would teach them about, muscular, physiology, exercise physiology, bone density, all of that, right? So ultimately, it's context. Like, what do you want to do, right? The martial vehicle is very great to have a reason to condition, right? Because you want to be able to move stronger and faster, right? Because some people, they just work out, but maybe they get lazy because, like, why am I running? Why am I doing pull-ups? Like, it's just to look good. Okay, maybe that's enough. But for martial, it's like maybe it helps you be able to do certain techniques more effectively. So I would say, yeah, more mass, but that could be like fat too, right? So I mean, if you, it's Thanksgiving right now. So if you overate, during this week, and you gain like 5 pounds, 10 pounds, right? And of mass, of fat, let's say, that's a lot. And so you, instead of weighing 160, you weigh 170, but you still have your neuromuscular, kind of coordination. Like, those punches that are going to come out, with 10 pounds more of fat are going to be stronger, right? You think of like the sumo wrestlers in Japan, like, they have fat around them, but also like, a lot of lean muscle mass underneath, right? So you definitely don't need a 6-pack. I mean, if you're going to do muscle ups, of course, it helps that you don't have extra mass or tissue besides the lean muscle mass, right? But in terms of martial context, it depends. But I would say, if you have time, and it is a priority to do some conditioning, but not just conditioning for conditioning's sake, I would choose exercises that actually are along trajectories that are as similar to your martial motion as possible, right? And so if you think about a punch, right? Let's say your right leg lead, and like this, and you want to punch, with left punch or left extension. If you go to the gym, I would say, see if you can find a cable, right? Those cables, grab it with your hand, like push, yeah, like that. And then use your legs too. So it's not just the arm, like from your feet, feel your feet, and then extend through your feet to your spine. And then when it gets to your shoulder, push out and back, right? So it's almost the same martial movement that you would do in that context, with resistance, basically, right? With resistance. Then you will make those musculo-tendinal connections stronger, maybe strengthen your ligaments, right? But maybe what I might do, and I've done it before, is like do movements like that, and do like, I don't know, 10 reps, 12 reps, depending on the weight. And then in between reps, actually just do the martial movement as you would do it, right? Without the weight. So you're kind of training your body, like, okay, this is not just a movement to lift weights, right? What's the point of that, right? So in between sets, maybe you're just doing some punches in the air to be able to kind of train your body, like, okay, this is for that. It's not just in isolation.
Yeah, I like what you said about the psychological aspects, because actually, when I'm training people, I do incorporate some, I guess, workout movements like push-ups and stuff, because I just think like a lot of the, I guess, what's said about Wing Chun is that it gives the impression that people, they don't have to do anything. It's like overcoming people with technique, right? And so you get a lot of guys that are, or a lot of people who are out of shape, right? Or even people that who proclaim to be like a so-called expert, right? And they have like a big stomach, and because I used to get a lot of these people. They say, oh yeah, I've trained for such and such years. I was like, okay, well, we have a warm up, and let's see, we'll just do 20 push-ups as part of the warm-up, right?
Mhm.
And so I think, people, they just don't, I know it's not the priority, but people don't know like how out of shape they actually are, right?
Mhm.
It's like, okay, if you're going to fight someone, your technique has to be like up here,
Mhm.
or you have to balance that out with a little bit of strength and fitness.
Mhm.
So
I
yeah,
see.
I think, yeah, so that's what I do. That's my little trick to, just to get people in the right, I guess, mindset of training, because our training is
Mhm.
not easy,
Mhm.
right? It's pretty hardcore. You have to be strong, and fast, and it's the training itself requires a lot of conditioning, right, against the arms and those types of aspects. But um yeah, I just think just instead of beating someone up at first class, you can have them ease into it with a kind of like a warm up, fitness warm up. So that's my idea of why I have it. So I'm not sure if you
Yeah.
do that
Yeah.
as well, but
Yeah. Again, it's school by school, right? Again, last
uh,
time I threw out those different martial activities, right? And for some schools, no kind of warm ups, no kind of even running around or push ups or any, no kind of separate conditioning exercises than just the training. That's fine. That's the prerogative of the teacher. They don't feel like it's necessary to have like, maybe they would call it supplemental or complementary training, maybe due to time or whatever. Yeah. Because maybe they only say there's a lot to cover, and so we only have an hour and a half, so let's just focus just on the martial part. That's fine. Yeah. But I would say, yeah, if it's kids, right, great to do some other things, because maybe just a technique, they don't have the attention span. And so maybe it's good to have them run around, and I'm sure the parents would love it if they burn off some excess energy, or, yeah.
mhm,
So it's very individual. And you're right. I mean, like, to be able to do like 20 push-ups or have that as a regular part, that's also kind of training your will, right? Also very important for kind of your martial path, to have that kind of willpower, focus,
mhm,
discipline, these kind of things, which can come from fitness training, but you can get it from other things too. Yeah. So, in some way, I would say it's great if you have the time and the interest, and the means to do non-martial motion conditioning for your skin, muscle, tendon, bones, cardiovascular, mind, right? Like for me, like I do meditation. Um, is that exactly is that a martial movement? No, because I'm just sitting there, right, doing eyes closed with the meditation. So in a way, that's supplemental. So I would say that's not absolutely necessary too, right? But do I feel like it helps? I would say, yeah, to be able to kind of just turn on the switch and like just focus, right? Because in a self-defense situation, right? Like, I think you can avoid, actually, if you're awake, like, oh, okay, something is going on. So put the phone down and run. Yeah. Or if you need to, if you're attacked, right, instead of like, oh, what's going on, right? Boom, you're able to focus. Okay, the attack came from there. So it kind of increases my presence or my sensitivity. Now, is it necessary? No, it's not. So I'm kind of drawing a parallel to like physical conditioning, as well as interoceptive or even breath work, learning how to regulate your breathing and control your autonomic nervous system so you don't overreact, right? So you're not getting like palpitations in a stressful situation. Is that necessary to train as a martial artist? Not necessary. Does it benefit? Yeah, I would say so. Right, to be able to have your mind go internally and be able to have a hand on the dial to regulate your heart rate, right, and your breathe via your breathing. Yeah, that's very powerful for a self-defense situation. Yeah, and maybe again that can help you avoid it. Right, so, but it's no replacement. Let's say it this way, like this meditation training or breath work or conditioning, right? Uh, doing pull-ups or push-ups, they are not substitutes, right? You can't just do that, right?
right.
So the priority is still, training your forms, training your techniques, your partner practice. And if you have time, then you can do, this conditioning, non-martial conditioning that, yeah, make your muscles stronger. And also maybe like the internal conditioning, if you will, make your mental muscle stronger. Like I said, if I had like a whole university program, yeah, I would say, okay, in the morning, everyone do meditation for 30 minutes, right? And then we go to the gym and work out for 30 minutes. and then or I would make space for everything, so it's more complete. So again, it's a time, it's a resource kind of thing. If you just want to be good at martial arts and you have limited time, then I would say just train the martial movement.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of times people, they have it, like you said, the opposite. Like, I guess it's because the social media, and I guess, what's put out on TV, and that is they see all these fighters and they're all like ripped and stuff. So people, they get into martial arts, they think, oh, well, I gotta have to do a bodybuilding program. And if you're a bodybuilder, yeah, you may be very strong, but I can tell you, like, a lot of martial artists, they'll beat bodybuilders, like.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Because
and then even oh, go ahead.
No, I was about to say, because they don't know the technique, they don't know the science, how to fight. So it's not going to help you.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's not just about your muscular shape, right? Because that's kind of external. I mean, I respect the will that it takes to become buff like that, but it's not the same, because you don't have that neuromuscular coordination. And I'll say, even like a belly. Okay, someone is overweight, and let's say their priority, because they live in a neighborhood that's kind of sketchy, and they really want to prioritize self-defense, but they're overweight. I would say that do I need to lose weight before I train? No, you better train right now. Come to class tonight, and even if you have a belly, right, like, you can defend yourself, right? And now if you start training more and you really love it, and you realize that you want to, you're more in touch with your body, and part of that, excessive weight you were holding is kind of like stress, right? People have emotional eating, or they don't value themselves very much. And through the martial practice, you're like, wow, you have these skills, and you want to improve these skills, and you want to protect and preserve these skills. And so you're like, wow, you know what? Like, and you're de-stressed, you let some of the stress out. So you may actually indirectly lose weight, lose that belly from the martial training itself, right? And so I don't want people to think like, oh yeah, I have to be in shape, six pack, and even like I said, it may actually help, maybe that belly is more protection. So if you get hit, it doesn't hurt as much, or it's more mass, right? So it's like, I lost all this weight, and now I can't hit as hard, like when I was 180 pounds. Boom, right? I have this mass behind it. Now I lost 20 pounds. I'm a bit more lean and faster, but maybe I sacrificed the momentum of my punch. Yeah. So I think accessibility and people starting as they are is fine, and unless you really have some broken leg or something like that, then okay, maybe try to heal that first. But I think martial practice, should. I think I said it in our last conversation. Everyone should have some ability to protect what is valuable, right? And hopefully that includes your own health, right? And if you really train, some kind of martial, or again, if you don't, this is just, you're listening to this just for conversation. You never train martial arts, but just the principle, right, of protecting, and it could be psychological, like to be able to get in touch with yourself, your capacities, right? And again, you could do whatever, yoga or dancing or singing, and have a sense of your center and your value, right? And then also be able to protect it. I think that's what, I don't know what else. I mean, there's some therapeutic kind of treatments or practices that talk about setting boundaries and things like that. But what's built into martial practice is automatic, like your personal and psychological space. So not that all martial artists are good at setting boundaries and not letting people mess with them, but at least it's built into the practice. And if you have a good teacher and a good training partners, you can really cultivate, the self-protection aspect of being human, which is part of the martial kind of, and I think that's showing up in general public as people being so easily influenced, right, by, you can say, negative, stimulation. Like, oh, right. But as a martial artist, like, if you really internalize, like, no, right? It's not like if your friend is having a bad day, you say, just get over it. But you can empathize, but also deep down, you're okay. You don't pick up, all those kind of influences that would just, drown you down. So it affects also your mental and physical health too. This you can say philosophy, but philosophy to me is not abstract. A good philosophy is absolutely 100% practical, which I think a lot of, if you're just sitting here listening to this, yeah, you may say, oh, this is just philosophy. But everything I spoke to, I was drawing from my own personal embodied experience. So hopefully if you have some training as martial artists or any kind of cultivator, that you can relate to what we shared. And if you don't, and you're motivated to, do some training, that some of our conversation was inspiring.
Yeah, that was good. Okay, you have one more time for one more?
Yeah, maybe one more. Yeah, short one.
Maybe.
Then I have yeah, let's see. You can ask it. Let's see.
Oh, short one. Let me go back to the questions then.
Yeah, or we can always do a part 3. Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so I'm just let's ask this, and maybe we can continue later on. But
Okay.
it just came up in my mind when you talked about the yin and the yang, about how to express Wing Chun as far as okay. So where I'm going with this is like a lot of people, they have, I guess in my mind, it's like old school mentality of like, okay, this should be a soft martial art or a hard martial art. And so a lot of people, they say that Wing Chun is a soft martial art.
Okay.
I know there's different, in my mind, there's different interpretations for soft. But is Wing Chun a soft martial art, or is it a little bit of both the hard and the soft? Or
I think,
how,
yeah, you can anticipate my answer because I already talked about how I like to be integrative and avoid this either or, because truth is holistic. And so maybe I can give a short answer for now. We can revisit this later. But even like, I mentioned a lot of physiology today, right? And so a human being is both hard and soft in the sense that, let's just look at your tissues, right? Your bones are hard, right? And so that's actually what we hit people with in martial arts, right? And so, of course, then the muscles are relatively softer, right? So in this context, you can say, if you say hard is yang and soft is yin, then you have both, right? Don't you have muscles and bones, right? Of course, there's other tissues like neurological, et cetera. But let's just say for now is that you want to be able to use both at the same time, right? Use those, move and contract those relatively soft muscles to accelerate the hard parts, the bone, to create some damage, right? And so in this kind of first version of answering, and there, like I said, there are other interpretations of gang rou, hard and soft. But for now, I'll answer in this more physiological way that it's both. It's coordination of yin and yang, right? Not yin or yang. How can you move a bone without muscle, right? And if you move a muscle without also, articulating the bone at the joint, like what is that, right? Like just so you need both, right? And so I sort of avoid this hard and soft kind of categorization. I understand and I know kind of where it comes from, but my answer is that it's always both. It's a relative proportion of both. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe next time we can go a little bit more deeper, because I would just want to pick your brain of like, okay, where does this idea come from, and what is hard and soft? How do people define it? Or like, what is it really? But I guess we could postpone that for the next time.
This is like a little trailer, right, as a segue into another conversation. So I think we went on for quite a bit. I don't know what the total amount of time, at least hour plus. So we can bookmark it here. Thank you for initiating this conversation, just like our last one. I enjoy it. So so open to continuing this dialogue with you. See you, Gary.
Great. Yeah, thanks. And I definitely enjoy these discussions. I think they help people out a lot, like just to clarify things and a lot of tips for the training and the philosophy behind it. I think it's very beneficial. So thank you. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. We'll talk again soon. Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.